Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your well-rounded math teacher, Mr. Pickar, and today we're going to do the notes video for the 5-7 solving quadratic equations by factoring. A little bit of review here. This is kind of what we worked on a couple days ago by finding zeros. We're going to graph this and find zeros. Now, zeros are where it crosses, your parabola crosses the x-axis. To start out with the y-intercept, that's when you plug in 0 for your x's, so they cancel out. So -3 would be your y-intercept. 0, -3. Okay. There we go. Your vertex, well, we'll find that after we find the axis of symmetry. Now remember, that's a little formula, x equals -b all over 2a to find your axis of symmetry. So here it would be x equals -b would be the opposite of -2, so that'd be +2 over 2 times a, and a as well. In front of your x squared term, that's 1. So it's 2 over 2 or just 1. So my axis of symmetry is x equals 1. Now my vertex, its x is going to be 1 also then. So going over here and graphing in our axis of symmetry. There it is, AOS, x equals 1. The vertex is on there, so we are going to plug 1 in for x and then solve for y to find the y value of our vertex here. So let's go with y equals 1 squared minus 2 times 1 minus 3. Okay, 1 squared is 1, -2 minus 3. So this is 1 minus 5 or -4. So 1, -4. So now we can kind of go in there and graph this a little bit. Start graphing what we know. 1, -4 is my vertex. 0, -3 is my y-intercept, and I can flip that over. So that's over 1 and up 1. And then if you go over 2 and up 4, you'll get the next point. Back 2 and up 4. Or you can use Desmos to get this last piece. Your zeros, okay? Once you find your vertex and all that stuff, you can use Desmos to kind of check your work. So our zeros are right here where it crosses the x-axis. This one looks like it's at 3, so I'd say x equals 3. And this one looks like it's at -1, so x equals -1. Now these are my zeros. They also call them roots or solutions. So if they ask for root 0 solutions, they're just talking about where it crosses the x-axis, your graph of your quadratic function, your parabola. Okay, so you can see we're going to solve by factoring down here, but before we do that, we got to talk about the zero product property. And that is this. Whenever you multiply two things, like a, b, and set it equals 0, that means one of two things. If I'm multiplying a times b, either a has to equal 0 or b has to equal 0. That's the zero product property. So if you multiply two things and get 0, one of those two things has to be equal to 0. One of those two factors has to be equal to 0. Okay? So that's the ZPP, zero product property, setting your two factors equal to 0. Okay. Next. Solving by factoring. Well, first we're going to factor this, okay? You always check GCF. If you look at your three terms here, do they have anything in common? No, they don't all have an x. And 14, 5, and 1, the only thing they're all divisible by is 1. So you're going to take the first term and multiply it by the last term, because we're going to factor this. This is a quadratic equation or general trinomial, 3 terms. So factors of -14 that add up to -5. And if I go with -1 and 14, that doesn't work. That adds up to 13. -2 and 7 That works, but I think I need a positive 2 and a negative 7. That would add up to negative 5. So this is 2x, negative 7x, and then we can go into factoring by, we'll use the reverse box method. I think most of you use the reverse box method. I'll show you both methods here in a little bit. So we're going to throw x squared in there and negative 14. So this is all review. This is just factoring. I'll put 2x on top, and we'll throw the negative 7x right here. And find our factors, okay? X squared and 2x, the only thing they have in common is x. X times x is going to give you my x squared here, and x times, looks like positive 2 would give you my 2x. Okay? So last one, well, these two have a negative 7 in common. I think that's what I'm going to use here. Negative 7. And if you look, negative 7 times x is negative 7x, and negative 7 times 2 right here is negative 14. So those are my two factors. So I got x plus 2 and x minus 7. And all of this, don't forget, is equal to 0 up here. I didn't talk about that in the beginning. You got to get everything equal to 0 before you can do this, because now we kick in the what's called the zero product property, okay? The ZPP. Now what that means is this is kind of like my A times this is kind of like my B right here. A times B, if that equals 0, that means A equals 0 or B equals 0. So what you're going to do is take your factors. The x plus 2 is kind of like my A, so I take x plus 2, set it equal to 0. And then solve it. Subtract 2 from both sides, I get x equals negative 2. That's one solution. X minus 7 equals 0. So adding 7 to both sides, I get x equals positive 7. So these are my solutions. And I do that by solving by factoring. A lot of people factor and then they quit, but once you factor, then you got to take each one of these factors and set them equal to 0 and then solve, and that's how you get your solutions actually for this. So let's look at the next one here. I kind of forgot to explain this in the beginning, but in order to do this, to solve by factoring, the first thing you got to make sure is everything is equal to 0. If it's not, you would add or subtract to get all your terms on one side equal to 0, and then you can go ahead and factor. If I look at all three terms, I'm not going to use greatest common factor here. They don't have all have an x, and all the numbers don't have any in common. So it's just a general trinomial, and we'll go right into it. 1 times 30. So factors of 30 that add up to 13. I don't think 1 and 30 will work. 2 and 15 add up to 17. I think 3 and 10 work. 3, x and 10x are what I'm going to be working with. You could do reverse box method. I'll do grouping for this one because I know some people like to group, and I want to talk about grouping again here. So it's x squared. This 13x breaks up into positive 3x plus 10x, and then you just bring down the 30. Don't forget, it's all equal to 0 here. So grouping this together now. I'm going to group these two together and these two together. Looks like I can take out an x out of these two. So x times what? Well, if I divide them both by x, here I'd have a 3. Now that's x squared over x to the first, so you just subtract the exponents. 2 minus 1 is 1. There's more up top here, so this cancels out. And this has just become x to the first, so x plus 3. These two looks like I can take out a 10. Positive 10. 30 divided by 10 is 3 again, and here the 10s cancel out. I'm left with just an x. Now, I don't have two factors of x plus 3. I have 1. I'm going to factor that out. X plus, well, I have 2, but that becomes one of my factors. And the other factor is what you factored out, x plus 10. Remember, it's equal to 0. So once again, some people think we're done. After you factor, you're done. You're not. You have to take and kick in the ZPP, the zero product property. set each one of your factors equal to 0. So x plus 3 equals 0, and then solve. Subtracting 3 from both sides, I get x equals -3. X plus 10 equals 0. Subtracting 10 from both sides, I get x equals -10. And there you go. Once again, these are my solutions. Okay, this one, example 3. Now, there's only 2 terms, so it's not a general trinomial. So it's either gonna be greatest common factor or difference of squares, perfect squares. One or the other. So if it's difference of perfect squares, well, they both have to be perfect squares. 9 is 3 times 3, that's a perfect square, but the x is not. Here, 3 is not a perfect square. That's 1 times 3. That's my only factors. X squared is. So it's not going to be difference of perfect squares. But I do notice they both have a 3 in common, and they both have an x. So, yeah, I can take a 3 out of both of them and an x. So I'm going to do greatest common factor for this one. So I got 3x times what? Well, the 3's cancel out here, and then I got x squared over x to the first. Subtracting those, this would cancel out. You're left with x to the first on top. Here the x's cancel out, actually. 9 divided by 3 is 3. That's a -3. And there it is. It's factored. Now, this is your first factor. It's only one term. That's fine. That's kind of like your A, and this is your second factor. That's kind of like your B, and you just set them equal to 0. 3x equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. And then you just solve both of them. Here I'm going to divide by 3. Well, 0 divided by 3 is 0. Here I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and x equals 3. There we go. Those are my solutions. Or you could call them roots. Sometimes they're called roots or zeros. And what I'm trying to get at is this. There's solutions, right, for this quadratic function. There's zeros too, so it crosses at 0 and it crosses at 3. Now it's a positive 3x squared, so it kind of opens up. So it's going to kind of look something like this. That's kind of what the graph for this function would look like. We solved it by factoring to find our solutions or our zeros. And then I just kind of graphed them in there. I'm not saying you got to do that, but I just kind of want you to picture what these solutions actually are. Okay? It's part of the graph. Okay. So example 4 here. The biggest thing here is if I'm going to solve by factoring, everything's got to be equal to 0. Here it's equal to 7. So I got to get rid of that 7. I got to bring it to the other side. So I'm going to do that by subtracting 7 from both sides. So I get 2x squared plus 13x minus 7. Now, these are not like terms, so I can't combine them. One's an x term, one's just a number. And none of the 3 terms have anything in common, so I'm not going to use greatest common factor here. It's a general trinomial, x squared, x, and a constant, so I'm just going to take this 2 and multiply it by the -7 and get -14. And then factors of -14 that add up to 13. Looks like -1 and 14 are going to work. -1 times 14 is -14, but when I add them, I get 13 right here. So it's -1x and 14x. I think I'll just do grouping for this one again. So I'm just going to go 2x squared, and then these 2 terms, -x, -1x, I guess, plus 14x minus 7 equals 0. So grouping them. In the first 2, all I can take out is an x. So dividing these both by x, I'm going to end up with 2 This would just become x to the first, so 2x. Here the x's cancel out and I'm left with a negative 1. Here it looks like I can take out a 7. 14 divided by 7 is 2, so that's going to be a 2x. And negative 7 divided by 7 is negative 1. So if we're doing this right, grouping, okay, the first factor would be the one they have in common, 2x minus 1. And the other factor is going to be what you're multiplying them by, and that's x plus 7 equals 0. So we got to be a little careful here now. My first factor is 2x minus 1. We're not done. ZPP, zero product property, set them both equal to 0. Okay? So I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and I get 2x equals 1. Now, a lot of people think, oh, my answer is just 1, but you got to solve for x completely, so we got to divide by 2, so it's actually a fraction. X equals 1/2. Subtracting 7 here, and I get x equals negative 7. So there's my solutions. My roots, my zeros. All the same thing. Now, the next part that we're going to do here is we're going to work backwards. I'm going to give you these 0 solutions roots, and I want you to change them to factors here, and to do that you get everything equal to 0, so we'd add 7, basically the opposite of what we did to get these two factors, and then we're going to multiply them going backwards to find our original quadratic that they came from. Okay, so instead of giving you a quadratic equation and then you solving it, we're going to give you the solutions and then you work your way backwards to get your quadratic equation. It seems kind of complicated, but it's not that bad. Okay, so let's go here. Directions say, given the roots. Well, roots are the same thing as zeros or solutions. Just remember that. Kind of put that in there. Jeez. Okay? Write a quadratic equation that they came from in standard form. So basically the opposite of what we just did. I'm just going to do a couple of these. X equals negative 5 and x equals 7. So I want the factor. In other words, what's the little thing equal to 0 here? Well, you got to get everything equal to 0. So I'm going to bring that negative 5 back over by adding 5 to both sides. And I get x plus 5 equals 0. Well, there it is. That's my first factor. Same thing here. I'm going to subtract 7 because I want everything equal to 0. And I get x minus 7 equals 0. So there's my other factor. And then I just take them and multiply them. So take your two factors, x plus 5 and x minus 7. And you could use the box method to multiply these. I'm not going to do that with the first one. I'm just going to use distributive property twice. So x times x is x squared, and then x times the negative 7, negative 7x. Now we got to work with the 5 and multiply that by both terms. That's going to give me 5x minus 7. Oh, I'm sorry. 5 times negative 7 is actually negative 35 equals 0. And then combine like terms. So it's x squared minus 2x minus 35 equals 0. Excuse me. There's my quadratic equation in standard form. So it's basically the opposite of what we just did. Usually we would factor this and find my roots, 0 solutions. Here you're going to work backwards and find that quadratic equation came from. We'll do example 5 now. Okay? So this one's a little bit different because it has a fraction. Some people get kind of mixed up because of the fraction. So first of all, I'm going to take x equals 5, real simple. Get it equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract 5. So it's x minus 5 equals 0. So there's your first factor. Now when you take that x equals 1/2, a lot of people just subtract the 1/2, but you don't want fractions here. So what you have to do is kind of Get rid of that 2 in the denominator. Well, how do you do that? Most, you just multiply both sides by 2. That 2 will cancel that 2 in the denominator out, and I end up with 2x equals 1. Now you just subtract 1 from both sides, and you get 2x minus 1 equals 0. So here's your other factor, okay? So you take the x minus 5 times the 2x minus 1. And once you multiply them, then you have your answer. I'll do the box method for this one. Just so you see you can use the box method too. We're just multiplying. And what do we got? X minus 5 and 2x minus 1. So the 2x times the x, that's going to give me 2x squared. And 2x times negative 5, that's negative 10x. Now multiplying that top row by negative 1. X times negative 1 is negative x. And negative 1 times negative 5 is positive 5. So here's my quadratic equation. 2x squared. These are both like terms, so I would add those up, and that's going to give me negative 1 plus negative 10. That's negative 11x plus 5 equals 0. Okay? And that's your quadratic equation in standard form. And you could use this distributive property here twice if you wanted to too. It's the same thing. We're going to skip the word problems for right now and jump right in to this worksheet. I want you to do 1 through 12. These 4 down here are the same thing that we just did. Here you're going to solve by factoring. A lot of people get confused with 11 and 12, so I'll show you number 11. Basically, they're saying what your quadratic equation in standard form for this graph. Well, people get confused. Find your zeros or your roots. Well, the first one's negative 3, 0. That means x equals negative 3. The other one is negative or 1, 0, and that means x equals 1. So change these to factors, multiply the factors, and you have your answer. So once you find these two, and you'll find yours over here too, looks like they're 5 and 4. Change them to factors. Get them equal to 0, in other words. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So x plus 3 equals 0. There's my first factor. Subtract 1. X minus 1 equals 0. There it is. And just take your two factors, x plus 3 and x minus 1, and then multiply them. Once again, you could use the box method. I'm going to use distributive property twice here. X times x is x squared. That'll give me negative 1x. Then multiply by 3 plus 3x minus 3 equals 0. So it's x squared plus 2x. These are like terms. They add up to 2x. Minus 3 equals 0. So there it is. There's my quadratic equation for that graph. So 1 through 12, and you're good to go. Submit it. If you have any questions, send me a message. Talk to you guys later.